First of all, welcome on behalf of the Public Library of Mount Vernon in Knox County, the NEA Big Read, and Break Bread Literacy Project. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. And I also want to make sure to thank the NEA Big Read and our friends at Arts Midwest, whose sponsorship makes this program possible. We'll be writing and learning today with Crystal A.C. Salas, our visiting writer and stellar poet. We are so excited to have Crystal back at the library because she does wonderful work with us and it's always a lot of fun. So thank you for being such an integral part of our NEA Big Read programming. Also want to acknowledge our incredible interns behind the scenes, making all of this Zoom magic happen, and sometimes, you know, in front of the camera and doing all sorts of tasks that I would be too overwhelmed to handle myself. We have with us Fisher Wheeler and Janine Brooks, and they're going to be coordinating the webinar today. So I will turn things over to them for some important announcements before we get started.
Hi, I have the amazing honor of introducing our speaker today. Crystal A.C. Salas is a Chicanics poet, essayist, educator, and community organizer. Her work has appeared in the Northwest Review, Pink Magazine, World Literature Today, Chaparral Poetry, Mythos Review, and others. She is a founding member of the Break Bread Literacy Project, which works alongside youth to elevate the voices of young creatives under 25 and serves as poetry editor for their quarterly publication, Break Bread Magazine. A 2021 California Arts Council Individual Artist Grant recipient, her chapbook Grief Logic is forthcoming in April 2002 from Gunpowder Press. She lives in Los Angeles, where she writes about the city's landscapes of grief and remembrance, memorialized and unmemorialized spaces.
So, and now, Crystal A.C. Salas.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. I really appreciate it, and I'm so happy to be here and to be with you all and to be creating. And for those of you watching at a different time in a different space, we're happy to have you here from the past into the future. So thank you in whatever form you're here. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to talk about the house on Mongo Street with you today, as well as to do some writing as a way to generate our own ideas, but also hopefully to better understand like the brilliance of Sandra Cisneros and what she's doing with this work. Okay, so my first question for you is, what do you think about when you hear the word myth? What is a myth? When it's like, Janine, what's a myth? Fisher, what's a myth? What do you say?
I immediately think of like Greek mythology specifically. Like that is just the first one that comes to mind, I suppose.
Yeah, and all those wild stories of Greek mythology. Yeah, Janine?
I think of how we're exploring the word myth in my women's gender studies class, which is like how myth relates into the common world and how we see the figures within myths in our own lives on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, beautiful answer. So we have a sort of like, we have like local specific definitions around, like Greek mythology, Norse mythology. We have these like people and or characters and like stories about them and how they came to be. I'm thinking like one of the most wild of those myths that I can remember is like literally how Zeus's children were born, just going full steam ahead out of his forehead, you know, like, wow, what chaos. There's a lot, you know, there's biblical myths, there's and then Janine, as you were saying, like this larger sort of mythos of like gender and how, you know, how we've come to know and understand it. So myth is everywhere. And I'd love to start with, you know, to sort of supplement that, this couple dictionary definitions. So myth as a traditional story, especially when concerning the early history of a people or explaining some natural or social phenomenon, and typically involving supernatural beings and events. And then I thought, okay, well, like be interesting to hear of the root word. So it comes from the Greek root mythos, which has a range of meanings from word to saying to story to fiction. So yeah, and I think we kind of covered that in your definitions that you shared. Do we have any other definitions? I love to build sort of a community definition of how you apply, how else you sort of interpret myth. So for me, I have a couple examples. We can also come up with like more specific ones, but like for me, it's an explanation of how something known or accepted as common knowledge came to be. An imagination of a background story. I was thinking of other, and we'll connect this to House on Mongo Street, but I was thinking about other like myths in literature, like and things that most high schoolers would know. And we know like Boo Radley, right? And like, what's the myth of Boo Radley? This idea of this sort of neighbor that seems kind of, he's very misunderstood. And so the kids come up with all sorts of like ideas about who Boo Radley is, and it is like a myth, right? What are some other definitions of myth for y'all?
I usually like it's almost a fantastical story. Like it's not so much like it can be explaining like a part of reality, but it's not so much grounded in reality.
I guess I kind of see it as like a juxtaposition or kind of an escape, but to highlight something. So like the myth of Mother Earth to highlight how we treat the natural earth and our resources.
Yeah, beautiful. So can also be used as like we have like parables are kind of like tied with myth, right? The story that stands in for something else and highlights something larger. And yeah, all of us like, yeah, that's really making me think, Janine, how much that ties in with figurative language, because like there is no literal Mother Earth, but we all have this idea of her in our head. And the bad things that we have done to her and how we don't appreciate her. So yeah, okay, so that's a wonderful place to start. The reason I am so interested in talking about myth today, stay right here, is because in the House on Mongo Street, we basically get a tour of Esperanza's neighborhood, as well as we get a tour of herself through that neighborhood. So in essence, we see we start to see the myths of her world and the myths of herself, what she's been told about herself, about who she is by the outside world, but also like as she meets her neighbors and tells us about her neighbors, we get these explanations of like who they are and what she notices about them. I'm thinking of characters. Perhaps y'all can help me too. Some of the characters that really stick out to me, like Kathy, Queen of Cats. She's got her own like mythology around her. Gerardo with no last name. Even the house on Mongo Street has its own like mythos, right? Anyone have any other characters that sort of stood out to them from the vignette?
I'm afraid I don't remember the characters from the book as well, but just thinking about like goddess of cats, I thought of Freya. So like from Norse mythology, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so it's actually, there's also connections to like established myth, right? And like widely accepted myth. Absolutely.
There's like a witch woman, right? I
yes.
vaguely remember that. That's one that
yep.
comes to mind.
There's the witch woman. Yeah, that's excellent. I'm thinking Elenita cards palm and water. She's the fortune teller. We've got the myth of even like there was an old woman who had so many children she didn't know what to do. myths sometimes are used as like warning stories, right? And the way that's titled is almost like a, you know, like a cautionary tale, right? Like she had so many children, she didn't know what to do. And then we find out some really sad things about, you know, what happened in her family. But yeah, we have myths of like gender norms here, and how she came to know them. I'm thinking of the shoes, or the family of little feet, right? And she describes all her family's feet, which is like fascinating. And then kind of goes into when her and her friends were trying on shoes and went out into the town and got a lot of like male attention in a way that was first kind of fun and then sort of scary. And she learned a lot about the myth of femininity while out and about, and then decided that they wanted to put it away. It was sort of like a Pandora's box, another myth that they wanted to close and not go back to for a while. Yeah, so I have some questions that might have us thinking about myths throughout this neighborhood, myths in our own world. And then we're going to start writing about myths in our own world and myths of self. So I wanted to give some time first. We don't have to go through all these questions, but they're starting points. Does anyone have any like descriptions from the book that they particularly like loved or really admired, or that really stuck to them? Like, so for me, I brought it up and I'll read it. But it's the family. I mean, there's so many. She's a master at that. But the family of little feet. The 59 for me. The way she describes the grandpa slept on the living room couch and snored through his teeth. His feet were fat and doughy like thick tamales, and he powdered and stuffed into white socks and brown leather shoes. The grandma's feet were lovely as pink pearls and dressed in high, velvety high heels that made her walk with a wobble, but she wore them anyway because they were pretty. The baby's feet had 10 tiny toes, pale and see-through like a salamander's, and these he popped into his mouth whenever he was hungry. The mother's feet, plump and polite, descended like white pigeons from the sea of pillow across the linoleum roses, down, down, down the wooden squares, over the chalk hopscotch squares, 5, 6, 7, blue sky. So we get these very different experience or descriptions of all these feet, which is like strange. Like, why would you spend so much time on feet? But what happens? We get so much about their character and about who each of these family members are in the world and to each other. Does anyone else have any like description that really, or like language that really stuck out to them?
I had to just look this up to make sure I was getting the quote correctly. But one of like there was just a specific line that I remember, like I think near the end, that really stuck out to me. I put it down on paper, and then the ghost does not ache so much. And I don't know, it's a very small thing, but I just remember being very like, yeah, that is how that works. When I first read it. I like the way it sounds. It feels correct, even if it's not saying like the exact.
Absolutely feels correct for sure. Like, what a great way to describe that. It feels correct. Yes.
I think a couple pages down below the family with the little feet, it was the scene about the Spartans, where I remember her saying, "I'm no Spartan," and I hold up my anemic wrist to prove it. And I just think the connection between the like movie and the film and her common life it stuck out to me, especially as like a version of it.
Yeah. Thank you, Janine. Yeah, that just like those associations bring us so much. Yeah. So, I want us to be thinking about the way that Sandra Cisneros describes, and as perhaps maybe a style that we can emulate. We can emulate later on. So just the associations that she makes to describe is something that we can try out later. So another question I have, Cisneros writes in, there's a vignette entitled "Those Who Don't Know." It is on, for me anyway, it's probably different for the version everyone else has, but those who don't on page 28. For me, it's a very, very short section. And she says, she writes of those who don't know about her neighborhood and the folks who live there. And it's that moment where she's talking about people who like come into her neighborhood and they're not from there, and how they often get like scared or uneasy. But she doesn't feel that way in her own neighborhood. It's not a scary place to her. Yeah, what is she saying about the way prejudices shape our perceptions of like us and them?
I mean, it's like it's having a perception of like a place and not being able to get past it even when you go to that place. I think she mentions like when she goes to other neighborhoods though, she gets scared of them too. So it's like it's not just the people coming into the neighborhood. She's like, yes, but sometimes like I do it too.
I think it really speaks to kind of like Fisher said, where like similarly as they're seeing her and her community in this way, she's also seeing their community in that way. So like the fear of just like not knowing where you feel safe, or like not being able to assimilate into a separate culture that's not your own.
You know, it's kind of reminding me of when we spoke with Sandra last week, and she was talking about you know, she feels as a resident of two countries, like she hears, if she's on one side, she hears it's so dangerous over there when she's going to go somewhere to the other side of the border, and vice versa. So it's like wherever you are, the other place seems scary and unsafe.
Also, like we mentioned like Boo Radley earlier, and that everyone was like afraid of him because they didn't know him. And that's kind of the same situation here. Like outsiders are afraid of like various different people in her community because they don't know like those people in their community. They think like looking out from the inside that they look scary even though they're not.
Yeah. Now, how within her own community, which is where we spend most of our time, how is Esperanza's identity shaped by her community? And how do we see her identity shift through these vignettes? Some of them are turned inward. They are about her, right? It's just like she's talking about herself. But most of them, she's looking outward, right? She's in somebody's, you know, she's looking at somebody else's house, or she's playing with some other kids down the street, or talking about what she's heard about people. So how is her identity shaped by this community?
I think she definitely feels like the sense of protection for her community, but in the same way, she not repulsed, but she almost seems kind of like trying to distance herself a little. Because I remember the interaction she has with her sister, like she's very protective of her sister, but at the same time, she's like, I don't want to hang out with her because she's not my age and I don't feel connected to her. But like, I think that's an interesting like dual dynamic to be in.
Yeah, thank you, Janine. There's definitely a push and pull. I related to that so much as an older sister, being like, no, I'm better mess with my sister, but also don't play with me and my friends because you're little. Yeah, there's also the parts, you know, she has so many revisitations to this feeling of like, I'm from here, but also I don't belong here. I want to go elsewhere. Mongo says goodbye sometime. She knows she'll have this home. and it'll be a part of her, but she knows she needs to leave it as well. And when we start with it, when she first moves into the house, it's not what she expected it would be. There is this sort of distance, but also she's distant and trying to leave, but it's more complicated than that, because somebody really trying to leave entirely would not spend so much time, like really just trying to so insightfully get to know everything and everyone around her. You know, there is this push and pull for sure. So I thought maybe we could read one of the vignettes and use it to talk about the next question. She met him at a dance, pretty too, and young. Said he worked in a restaurant, but she can't remember which one. Geraldo.
That's all. Green pants and Saturday shirt. Geraldo. That's what he told her.
How was she to know she'd be the last one to see him alive? An accident, don't you know? Hit and run. Marin, she goes to all those dances. Uptown, Logan, Embassy, Palmer, Aragon? Yes. Fontana, the Manor. She likes to dance. She knows how to do the cambadas and salsas and rancheras, even. And he was just someone she danced with, somebody she met that night.
That's right.
That's the story. That's what she said again and again. Once to the hospital people and twice to the police. No address, no name, nothing in his pockets. Into the shame.
Only Marin can explain why it mattered. The hours and hours for somebody she didn't even know. The hospital emergency room. Nobody but an intern working all alone. And maybe if the surgeon would have come, maybe if he hadn't lost so much blood, if the surgeon had only come, they would know who to notify and where.
What difference does it make? He wasn't anything to her. He wasn't her boyfriend or anything like that. Just another brazier who didn't speak English. Just another wetback. You know the kind. The ones who always look ashamed. And what was she doing out at 3 a.m. anyway? Marin, who sent home with her coat and some aspirin. How does she explain?
She met him at a dance. Geraldo in his shiny shirt and green pants. Geraldo going to a dance.
What does it matter?
They never saw the kitchenettes. They never knew about the 2-room flats and sleeping rooms he rented, the weekly money orders sent home, the currency exchange. How could they?
His name was Geraldo, and his home is in another country. The ones he left behind are far away. We'll wonder, shrug, remember. Geraldo, he went north. We never heard from him again.
You'll remember one of the most commonly known stories from this book is My Name, and she talks about the origin. Esperanza talks about the origin of her name. And then we have Geraldo, no last name, right? Esperanza talks about how many names she has and her family's names, and there's just so much detail. And then we have Geraldo, who has no last name. What do these stories tell us about how our identities and who we are tied into our names? And perhaps how do names affect the way that we see ourselves and the way others see us, either for ourselves generally or in this book?
I mean, with Geraldo, no last name, like obviously the tragedy is like very clear. You just like didn't know who this like guy was. You don't know who to identify. But like that's the thing, is the last name is like the family kind of. And like you don't have that, and so you don't have like his family, and you don't know who to tell. And that's why like the kind of tracing like where the name comes from, you have all these ties to like who gave it to you and all of that. And so Geraldo, like having been kind of stripped of that just by dying, I guess, is alone. Very, very sad.
Yeah, he's alone, like singularly, and also like just like he's not tied to, he's alone, and he's like alone, right? It creates so many levels of aloneness, for sure. Thank you, for sure. Esperanza having so many names and so many definitions for her name speaks to how tied she is to her family. And then Geraldo having no last name speaks to like his separation, right, from not only like his where he is, but wherever he belongs, and this imagining that she does of like who's waiting for him is such a gift and such a human like necessity for what has happened to him. My last question regarding this vignette: how are these questions working in this vignette, but also in others that she writes? She does a lot of turning to, like, she'll be narrating Esperanza and then she turns to a question.
I mean, it's kind of a way to like involve you in the story. Like obviously like you're the one reading it, but it forces you to like become part of the narrative as well. In a way I really appreciated reading the different vignettes, is because it kind of forced me to slow down while reading like the book in general. I don't know, it was nice to be included.
You know, that's okay, Janine. Thank you. We're just happy to have you here. So yeah, Fisher, that's so great. Like, I think at first when she pivots that very first time, it's like, who are you talking to? Oh, is it me? Like, I guess I should, like, I am implicated in this, right? Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna switch to some writing. And we're going to do some brainstorming first. So we're going to think about this in two sort of halves, and then you'll get to pick which feels the most interesting to you. So we're going to first start with the myth of self. So I want you to think about your childhood or your young adulthood, as we are all, as Sandra said last week, you know, some of us are forever 11 or forever, 15 or some age older than we've ever been. But I want you to think about some of the things that you've been told about what and who you are. So some examples, you don't have to answer all these questions, they're just starting points that might get you going. Your place in your family. So example, like, what is your birth order and what does that mean in your family, in families in general, but in your specific family, what has it come to mean? The origin of your name or names that you've been given, names that you've given yourself, names that friends have given you, all of those. How would other kids in your neighborhood or your elementary school class remember you? You know, like, oh, that was that kid that blah, blah, blah. What is your first memory of hearing a compliment about yourself? And conversely, what is your first memory of hearing a criticism about yourself? For example, me, as the poet I am, I think the first criticism I remember hearing about myself was like, gosh, you're so sensitive. You're too sensitive. And yeah, and so that has stuck with me. Your astrological sign and what it means to you. Do you connect with it? Do you feel like it's accurate? Do you reject it? Anyway, these are just some questions to get you started. You don't need to answer all of them or any of them at all. So I'm gonna have you sort of peek back in. I have another sort of brainstorming area for you, but if you're like really jamming with this one, you can totally keep going, or you can just sort of save it for later. This is the great thing about these generative workshops, is they're starts, because, you know, having a few minutes of time to write is really an artificial or arbitrary sort of amount of request upon your creativity. So these are starts, and then you can start them and finish them, keep going with them later. So mythos of your neighborhood. So I want you to think of the narrative geography of the place that you grew up. As in, if we were to get a tour of your street, whatever your Mongo street is, as Sandra was saying, everybody has one. What legends would you point out? I think of like urban legends of the neighborhood. Here's where we saw Sasquatch, or, you know, the rumor, you know, rumor has it that, this ghost, lives over here and in this building on this school, that sort of thing. Here's some other examples. I didn't actually, that's a good one. I didn't write that down yet, but at this house, blank happened, or on Halloween, blank happens, like they decorate in this way, and blank candy is handed out. That's like a memory of a place. Blank lives at this house, and it's said that what about them? Maybe it's the grumpy neighbor that you've made stories about. My friend blank lives or used to live at this house, and I've always wondered blank about their family or about why they moved away, or so some of these can be things you actually know or things you've imagined about how things are, or just general sort of like legends of your town where you were born, or where you've spent part of your childhood. Okay, so with those brainstorms, I want you to write a vignette, so a little paragraph in which you explore a myth about yourself or a myth present in your neighborhood or hometown. And just as Sandra Cisneros does, or actually Esperanza, because this is Esperanza's voice, as she does, where she, walks us through it or lets us know about this person, or and a style challenge, or imagines this person's backstory. Style challenge for you: try to emulate Cisneros' style by paying particular attention to your descriptions, and or also pivoting into asking questions. So how do you pivot to your reader and ask them questions? Or in some cases, I'm thinking like Sally. She has a few pieces about this girl, Sally, who she knows. And one of those pieces, she doesn't turn to the reader so much, she turns to Sally. She's asking Sally questions about what she thinks or what she needs, or how she feels. So that's also something you could do, is ask questions of that character in the middle of narrating them. Does anyone want to share what they wrote, or like a summary of like kind of what they ended up talking about, or any sort of little taste?
Sure, like the first bit of
I love
what I
that.
wrote. I wrote mine about my name. I never met my grandfather, having been born after he died, but in true Jewish tradition, I was named for him. My grandfather wasn't Jewish, wasn't anything according to my dad. My dad isn't anything either. Really just my mom, and she passed on her Jewishness to my brother and I. But I used to be named for him, my grandfather. I'm not named for anyone anymore. I wrote mine about my name because I did used to be named for my grandfather, and then I changed my name, and I'm no longer named for him. So it's an interesting thing to think about. It's an interesting thing to write about as well.
Sure, thank you. I remember you shared how you chose your name and why you chose your name in our last meeting, and I think I can already, as you were reading that, I was like, I can already see the next paragraph of that vignette. Like, that's the beginning. That is the origin story, and I love the depth of that story already. Like, this sort of being named after someone, but no longer named after somebody. And this idea of being named after someone as a carrying of something from that person, but to name oneself is to like, is like the ultimate self independence, right? Self liberation. Like, no, I'm the one who names myself, and I think, yeah, I love that. I would love to see if you put those two together. Like, it could be something really awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Anyone else want to share?
I explored my position in my family. So like how I'm the youngest of my immediate family, but not of my entire family, and how that relates to how people treat me.
Thank you, Janine. Such a complicated relationship you're exploring, like birth order, and it's so true. Like it may mean one thing in your household and then a totally other thing in the larger family. Totally relate. And thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure that sharing, I mean, for both Fisher and Janine who shared, like for our anyone watching this and participating in it, like that might spring some ideas for them. Like, how does that, connect to me? I ended up just a summary writing about a family that I used to babysit for as a kid. And I just hadn't thought about them in years. And so that was interesting to dig into the sort of like assumptions I had about the family or things I've always wondered about them. Yeah. Okay, well, I want to be respectful of our time here. So I just want to thank everybody for being part of this and writing together. And I hope that you had a good time talking about House on Mongo Street and also doing your own little vignette tour through your neighborhood or yourself.
Crystal, thank you so much for being here today. It's always good to have you at the helm. And I'm always really amazed at the ways that you continue to bring more nuance to this. I hadn't really thought about the connection between myth and Mongo Street, but she almost weaves her own mythological tapestry, right, of characters through the course of this book. And we're really grateful that you could be here with us, leading our discussion of our NEA Big Read book. If anyone would like to follow Crystal on social media and read more of her work, check out the chat. Fisher's going to post some links and you can find her there. And I will turn things over to Janine.
There are so many NEA Big Read events coming up, and it would take forever to list them all out. But this upcoming week, we have the Public Library of Mount Vernon in Knox County hosting the story time with Miss Morgan on the library's YouTube channel on Thursday, March 17th. And next week, Teens Makerspace is the Mango Street in the Makerspace series continues with the Peruvian Rain Sticks craft bags available on the 19th of March, which is a Tuesday. Please visit the Knox County website for a full list of programs and times and any registration info.
Our public library online programs are accessible from anywhere, anytime, and we love having visitors join us via knox.net and our extremely cool YouTube channel.
Thank you, Fisher, Janine, and Crystal. Yeah, if you missed something, there's a decent chance that it's on our YouTube channel. In fact, you can see our virtual visit with Sandra Cisneros and many, many other exciting events that we have done so far, and many things lie ahead that are going to be fantastic. So last final shout out, special thanks to the NEA Big Read, which is a program of the National Endowment for the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest. Thanks again for joining us. Happy writing and see you soon.